So thank you to everyone who came out today on this super cold and chilly afternoon to hear me talk a little bit about this work. Okay? So I really focus on how you can frame role models as allies in order to promote belonging amongst Black women. Okay? So even though I'm focusing on Black women and their experiences, this work has implications for really any underrepresented identity. And so what I'll do at the end of my talk is talk about some specific implications for Elon and how this work can apply here. Okay? So let's go ahead and get started. I also just want to mention I'm fully comfortable with stopping me and asking questions if needed, but also there'll be time at the end for questions as well. Okay? So if you happen to be a member of an underrepresented group, okay, so if you are religious or a sexual minority, or if you're someone who is a part of a group that has a negative stereotype attached to it, you tend to report lower levels of belonging on college campuses. Okay? So for instance, if you look at students of color who attend predominantly white institutions, such as Elon, a PWI, they tend to report lower levels of belonging, less likely to feel connected and involved on campus compared to students of colors who attend historically Black colleges and universities. Okay? So one reason that you might see this lower level of belonging is due to what we call social identity threat. Okay? And this is really the crux of my work. And so social identity threat is simply kind of being concerned or being worried that you will not be valued because you happen to identify with this group that's underrepresented or that has this negative stereotype attached to it. Okay? And so if you happen to be someone who possesses dual stigmatized identities, so perhaps a woman of color, you're particularly susceptible to experiencing social identity threat. All right? So what I try to do in my work is introduce identity-safe cues in order to alleviate these social identity threat concerns. Okay? So an identity-safe cue is just something in the environment that signals that your identity is valued here. Okay? And so what I focus on in my work is using role models as identity-safe cues. Okay? And so they've used these in previous work, and they found that this is one way to try to enhance belonging and kind of alleviate those social identity threat concerns. So for example, when you expose women who are in underrepresented environments, okay, to a successful and a relatable role model, they report increased identification with the role model and also an enhanced sense of belonging. Okay? And so that kind of tells us that introducing that role model allows that role model to serve as that identity safe cue, and then we see that individual bolstering that sense of belonging. Okay? Now, importantly, when they've looked at the use of role models amongst Black women, the literature is really mixed. Okay? And so it's unclear what type of role model is really going to alleviate those social identity threat concerns. Okay? And so is it the case that that role model needs to have a shared gender identity, a shared racial identity, or perhaps both, or maybe neither? Okay? The literature is really mixed. Okay? It's unclear what role models will serve as that effective identity safe cue for Black women. Okay? And so that's where my work comes in. And so what I'm going to be doing with you all today is sharing 3 studies. Come on in, Charles. Oh, it's fine. So I'm going to be sharing 3 studies with you all who examine the effectiveness of role models to alleviate social identity threat concerns. So kind of increase that sense of belonging in various environments. Okay? So in my first study, I'm going to focus on some Black women recruited from a college campus, and we're going to look at the impact of role models on belonging. And then my last 2 studies, I'm going to be sharing with you some data where we are testing an intervention in order to boost the effectiveness of these role models. Specifically, what we're doing is framing these role models as allies in order to boost these Black women's sense of belonging. Okay? So the goal of this first study is really simple. Okay? We simply wanted to identify what type of role model is going to alleviate those social identity threat concerns. Okay? So really increase that sense of belonging amongst Black women. Okay? So in this first study, we recruited Black women from IUPUI. IUPUI is Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. Has anyone heard of it? A few of you, okay? So people call it ooey pooey, but no one who goes there calls it that, okay? And so if you're not familiar with IUPUI, it is a predominantly white institution like Elon, but it's a really large campus, okay? So it has about 30,000 students, and 24% of those students are students of color, okay? So we recruited a little over 200 students from IUPUI, and we just had them complete a survey online. And that survey was made up of a few different measures. Okay? And so the first was just a measure that tapped into their sense of belonging. Okay? So this is our way of getting at those social identity threat concerns. So to what extent do you feel like you fit in and are a part of campus? Okay? Now, obviously, I'm also interested in role models and to what extent role models can serve as an identity safe cue. So we had our participants list their role models on the campus. It had to be someone that was a part of the university in some way, and they could list up to 10. And in addition to identifying their role models, they also indicated the gender and the race of the role model, because this then allows us to see to what extent those role models have that overlapping identity. Okay? So the final thing that we measured in this study is what's called stigma consciousness. Okay? So if you're not familiar with stigma consciousness, it's an individual difference measure, kind of like a personality scale, that taps into how sensitive someone is to experiencing discrimination on the basis of their group membership. Okay? And so to help you all get a better feel for what stigma consciousness is, I have the 9 items here that the scale is made up of. The R next to it, a little pointer's not working, just means that that item is reverse scored. Okay? And so, for example, when interacting with people, I feel like they interpret all of my behaviors in terms of race and gender. Okay? So what this is really getting at is to what extent is that person kind of chronically thinking about and worrying about being the target of discrimination on the basis of their race and gender. Okay? Now, what's nice about this scale is that obviously you can modify it to assess any identity, and in some other studies we have, but here we're specifically focusing on to what extent you have these concerns tied to both your race and your gender. Okay? So as I mentioned in the previous work where they've looked at the impact of role models, there's really lots of conflicting findings. And usually when there's lots of conflicting findings, what's missing is an important moderator. Okay? And so we thought this might be the moderator that kind of helps us understand what role models are going to be most effective. Okay? So they completed this stigma consciousness scale. And so what this allows us to do is then look at the interaction of stigma consciousness with the number of role models to predict belonging. Okay? So how those two work in conjunction to predict our participants' belonging. Okay? And also because we have the gender and the race of the role models, we're able to look at role models that share both identities versus perhaps sharing a gender identity. Okay? And so in this first graph that I'm going to show you, just to orient you to the graph, so on the y-axis there is belonging and trust. That's getting at our social identity threat concerns. This is just a number of non-black female role models. So these are role models that share the same gender identity, but not the same racial identity. Green line is low stigma consciousness. That's 1 standard deviation below the mean. Blue line is high stigma consciousness, 1 standard deviation above. Okay? So what did we find here? Okay? So first, let's focus on that blue line. So these are participants who are high in stigma consciousness. You probably noticed that that line is almost flat. Okay? So the slope of that line is not significant. And so what that's telling us is that as the number of non-black female role models identified increase, that's having no impact on belonging for participants who are high in stigma consciousness. Okay? Now let's look at participants who are low in stigma consciousness. So here we see a very different pattern. Okay? So as the number of non-black female role models increase, okay, we also see their overall belonging and trust at the university increases as well. So what this is telling us is that for black women who are low in stigma consciousness, having a role model that shares a common gender identity seems to be enough to kind of alleviate those social identity threat concerns. But for black women who are high in stigma consciousness, it's really not doing anything for them. Okay? So next I'm going to focus on the number of black female role models. So these are the role models that share a common racial and gender identity. Okay? So same setup, green line, low stigma consciousness, blue line, high stigma consciousness. Okay? So what's happening here? Okay? Very different pattern of results. Right? So first, starting with the low stigma consciousness, this green line is not significant. Okay? So as the number of black female role models identified increased, this is not having any impact on the belonging of participants who are low in stigma consciousness. Okay? In contrast, for our participants who are high in stigma consciousness, here we're seeing that as the number of black female role models identified increases, so is their overall reported belonging. Okay? So for black women who are high in stigma consciousness, having a role model that shares that common racial and gender identity is critical in order to alleviate those social identity threat concerns. Okay? So what did this first study show us? That what role model is most important is very much tied to participants' levels of stigma consciousness. Okay? So for black women who were high in stigma consciousness, it was critical to have a role model that shared the same racial and gender identity in order to see those social identity threat concerns alleviated. However, for Black women who were low in stigma consciousness, having a role model that shared that common gender identity seemed to be enough to kind of increase belonging. Okay? And so after we ran this first study, we said, this is good, this is nice, I like this data. Okay? But we really wanted to figure out a way to make a white female an effective role model. Okay? And we wanted this role model to be effective regardless of participants' levels of stigma consciousness. So the reason we chose to focus on white female role models is because our data already kind of suggested that this might be a good way to go. So specifically, when you looked at those participants who were low in stigma consciousness, those were role models, a lot of those role models were white women, okay? And also the reality is that when you kind of look around in academic environments, there tend to be lots of white females. And so we said, let's start there. They share a common gender identity. Perhaps this is one tool we can use to try to bolster belonging, okay? And so the goal of the second study was to try to identify an intervention that would then allow a white female role model to serve as an effective role model, okay? So when we were trying to identify how to make a white female an effective role model, we focused on some research that looks at diversity in companies, okay? So specifically what this work has found is that if a company endorses a multicultural perspective, okay, so if they indicate that they value diversity and that they readily kind of approach this type of mindset, ethnic minorities will report that they feel more welcome in those environments, and they'll also express greater interest in working at those companies, okay? So we thought perhaps if we have a white female role model who indicates that she values a multicultural perspective and that she values diversity, maybe that then will allow her to serve as an identity safe cue, and then she'll be an effective role model for Black women, okay? We were also really interested in allyship, okay? And so we came across this nice work in the field of education that focuses on the experience of Black women who are student leaders on their college campus. And what this work found is that they reported having positive experiences with their white female counterparts if they came across as an ally, okay? And in terms of what allyship looked like, it was being willing to have these open and honest discussions about race. And in these discussions acknowledging, even though you are a woman like me, your experiences are different as a Black woman, okay? And so we said, well, applying this to our work, if we have a white woman role model and we frame her as an ally, okay? So have her indicate that she values the unique and interesting perspectives that Black women have to offer, perhaps that will allow her to be perceived as an ally and then serve as that identity safe cue, okay? And so we tested these ideas in my second study, okay? Now, in these intervention studies, we shifted gears a little bit. So as opposed to recruiting Black women from college campuses, we recruited Black women from the general population, okay? And the reason we did that is because it is challenging to recruit large numbers of Black women from college campuses, okay? Even at a university that has 30,000 participants, or 30,000 students, okay? And so we recruited Black women from the general population using Amazon's Mechanical Turk. If you're not familiar with Amazon's Mechanical Turk, it's an online crowdsourcing platform that allows you to administer your survey. You pay them a fee and they pay your participants for you. And you can get big numbers of participants for the demographic you need, okay? Now the trade-off of recruiting Black women from the general population is that they're probably not going to have the same belonging concerns that Black women college students would have on a college campus, okay? And so in order to address that, we said, well, let's just create a situation where they'll probably have some social identity threat concerns. And how we did that is we had them imagine they worked at a science company, okay? So you probably know that women are underrepresented in STEM. Ethnic minorities are underrepresented in STEM. Women of color are really underrepresented in STEM. They only represent about 2% of all STEM jobs, okay? So we simply told our participants to imagine how you would feel if you were working at this company. You guys see the fake web page we made. It looks like a science company, right? So they're imagining that they work at a science company, okay? So I'm an experimental psychologist, so here's where the experiment comes in, okay? So we had 5 conditions. Our first condition was just our no profile. This is our control. That means that they saw that web page and then they moved right on to our measured variables. Our remaining conditions, so we had our Black woman profile, okay? Because our research suggests that Black women really like Black women as role models, so you need to have that condition as a comparison. So this is an example of what they saw. So some information that shows that this person is a successful and relatable role model, and then clearly they are a Black woman, okay? Or they were randomly assigned to the white woman profile condition, same information in the profile, just a different photo, okay? And then we had our 2 new conditions. So first we had our condition where our white woman scientist is endorsing a multicultural perspective. So they would read this information and then there would be an additional paragraph. And she just says that she likes having a diverse research team and she makes sure that she has a diverse research team as part of her lab. Okay, so endorsing that multicultural perspective. Then in our fifth condition, the ally condition, here we take it a step further. So again, they read this information in the profile, then this additional paragraph. And so she says she recognizes that women of color are underrepresented in the sciences. Even though I'm a woman, I recognize my experience as a white woman is different from that of a woman of color. And because of that, I work to actively recruit them into my research lab. Okay? So never use the word ally, right? Which is a whole nother question about self-identified allyship and what that means, but comes across as someone who seems to be an ally and an advocate for black women. Okay? So after completing this information, our measured variables. So we measured predicted trust and comfort. So this is getting at how comfortable you think you would feel if you were to work at this company. This is analogous to that belonging measure. So they're very similar, highly correlated. And so this is getting at our social identity threat concerns. And then we again measured stigma consciousness, okay? Because consistent with our first study, we saw it was an important moderator. And so obviously we want to measure it here as well, okay? So what did we find? So just orienting you to this graph because it's a little bit different than the graph in study 1. So on the y-axis is trust and comfort. That's getting at social identity threat concerns. Then we have our 5 conditions here. And then on the x-axis on the left is those who are low in stigma consciousness, so 1 standard deviation below the mean. On the right, those who are high in stigma consciousness, so 1 standard deviation above the mean. Okay. So what did we find? I'm going to walk you guys through these results, even though my little red light isn't working, so I'm just going to have to touch the screen a lot, but that's okay. So we dummy coded our conditions. Our reference condition is the no profile, so these are effects in relation to when they didn't see a role model at all. Okay? And so focusing on this pink line, the no profile versus the white woman condition, as well as the no profile versus the, I think that's purple, white woman multicultural condition, we don't see a significant interaction of stigma consciousness there, okay? In fact, one thing that we did find in this study was that having a role model that endorses diversity was not enough to be an identity safe cue, okay? It didn't result in increased levels of belonging, okay? So we're not seeing a significant interaction of stigma consciousness for those 2 conditions, okay? However, if we look at the no profile condition versus the black woman condition, so that's that white line, there we are seeing a significant interaction of stigma consciousness. Okay. Then if you turn and look at the no profile versus the white woman allies, so this light blue line, interestingly, the interaction was not significant. Okay. But if you kind of just eyeball the blue line for the white woman ally condition versus the black woman condition, the white line, you see there's 2 very different patterns of results going on there. And if you concentrate on those 2 conditions and contrast them directly, the interaction is significant. Okay? So because of that, I want to focus on these 2 conditions, looking at participants who are low versus high in stigma consciousness. Okay? So first, looking at participants who are high in stigma consciousness, when we look at the effect of the no profile condition versus the black woman condition amongst participants who are high in stigma consciousness, that effect is significant. Okay? And so what we're seeing here is that overall, black women are reporting the lowest levels of belonging unless they viewed that profile of that black woman scientist. Okay? So here again, we're seeing that for black women who are high in stigma consciousness, it's really critical to have a role model that shares that same race and gender identity. Okay? Now, if you look at the white woman ally condition versus the no profile condition amongst participants who are high in stigma consciousness, that interaction is not significant. Okay? Now, turning to those participants who were low in stigma consciousness, if you focus on the black woman condition versus the no profile condition, that interaction is not significant. Okay? However, if you focus on the white woman ally condition versus the no profile condition for participants who were low in stigma consciousness, that interaction is significant. So here what we're seeing is that for participants who are low in stigma consciousness, they're reporting the highest levels of trust and comfort at the company when they view the profile of a white woman who could be framed as an ally. Okay? So what did we find in this second study? Okay? So again, we're seeing what role model is most effective for black women is very much tied to their levels of stigma consciousness. Okay? So for black women with high levels of stigma consciousness, they reported the lowest levels of trust and comfort unless they viewed the profile of that black woman role model. Okay? So having that role model that shares that common racial and gender identity seems to be quite critical for black women who are high in stigma consciousness. Okay? However, for Black women who were low in stigma consciousness, they benefited the most when that white woman came across as an ally. Okay? So we were really excited after we ran this study because we kind of got at an intervention that seemed to be effective for Black women. But one remaining question was, how can we make a white woman an effective role model for Black women who are high in stigma consciousness? Okay? Because across 2 studies, we seem to have found that in order for a Black woman to have those social identity threat concerns alleviated, she has to have a role model who shares a common race and gender. Okay? And so the goal of study 3 was to try to identify an intervention that would be effective for Black women who were high in stigma consciousness. Okay? Doing good on time. So when we were trying to identify an intervention, trying to think about what is a strategy we could use to make a role model more effective for Black women, we focused on contact theory. Okay? And so for those of you who are not familiar with contact theory is just the idea that in order to change attitudes towards an outgroup, you have to have positive quality contact with people who are part of that group. Okay? And so specifically, we honed in on extended contact theory. And so extended contact theory is the idea that if I am an in-group member and I find out that a fellow in-group member has had positive experiences with that outgroup, by extension, I should then acquire more positive attitudes towards that outgroup as well. Okay? So that contact that they've had that's been positive should kind of extend to me, even though I haven't had the direct contact, and should alter my attitudes towards that outgroup. Okay? So applying this idea to our work, it suggests that perhaps if we had a Black woman endorse a white woman role model as an ally, that will then allow that role model to serve as an effective identity safe cue. Okay? And so we tested this idea in my 3rd study. So again, we went back to Amazon's Mechanical Turk in order to test this intervention. Also, Amazon's Mechanical Turk has a feature that allows you to exclude anybody that's previously participated in your study. So this is a brand new set of Black women. But it's the same setup as the previous study. Okay? So imagine how you were feeling if you were working at this science and technology company. Okay? So they viewed this webpage for this fictitious science company. And then our participants were randomly assigned to one of 3 conditions. Okay? So I had our same 2 conditions from our previous study. So they either viewed the profile of a Black woman scientist or they viewed the profile of a white woman scientist. Okay? And then we had our new condition. Okay? So in this condition, our participants read the information about the white woman scientist, and this information was that information from study 2 about the ally. And so she describes herself as someone who values the unique perspectives of Black women, and that she works to actively recruit them into her research. Okay? So they read all of this information, and then we say, we also have a testimonial from a research assistant that's actually worked with this role model. Okay? And so that testimonial is a Black woman, and she describes her positive experiences with the role model. Okay? So she takes it a step further, explicitly acknowledges that this person is an ally, so she labels her an ally and an advocate, and basically just reinforces all of the things that the person said about themselves. Okay? So she works really hard to make sure that our voices are heard in the sciences, and she actively recruits women like me so we can be represented as well. Okay? So here you have a case where an in-group member you don't know, right? But someone who is a part of that same group as you, endorsing this person explicitly as an ally for your group. Okay? So what did we measure in this 3rd study? Same thing as study 2, so predicted trust and comfort to get at those social identity threat concerns. And then again, we had our participants complete that measure of stigma consciousness just to tap into how sensitive they are to the possibility of experiencing discrimination. Okay? So what did we find? Same setup as study 2. Okay? So y-axis trust and comfort, 1 standard deviation below, those are participants who are low in stigma consciousness, 1 standard deviation above, participants who are high. Only difference here is our reference condition is the white woman because we didn't have the no profile condition in this study. Okay? So looking at, those lines are good, right? When the lines, when they cross, you know they're good. Yeah, no. So looking at the white woman condition versus the black woman condition. So this effect was marginal, but it was consistent with what we've seen in the other two studies. Okay, so that black woman is serving as an effective role model, which makes sense. Okay, but we're most interested in what's happening in this condition, right? And so when you look at the white woman condition versus the white woman ally, who has been endorsed as an ally condition, that is a significant interaction of stigma consciousness. So of course we want to look at this amongst participants who are low and high. We're most interested in those who are high on stigma consciousness. And we found that the effect of the white woman ally condition, who's been endorsed as an ally, versus the white woman condition, that effect is significant amongst participants who were high in stigma consciousness, was not effective amongst participants who were low in stigma consciousness. Okay?
The white woman was not a white woman ally, is that correct?
Correct, right? So we're still trying to figure out the best thing to call this. My research students call her a basic white woman. And I'm like, I don't know if we should. I said, we'll just call her non-ally, right? In order to make it clear. But yes, that's clear. Okay. So what did we find in study 3? Okay, so we finally found an intervention that seems to be effective for black women who are high in stigma consciousness. Okay, so specifically, if you have someone who is an in-group member, endorse that person as an ally, that then allows that role model to serve as an identity safe cue, and we see those higher reported levels of trust and comfort at this science company. Okay, so to summarize these 3 studies, when you consider the intersectional nature of identity, what we're seeing, it's really not this one size fits all. Okay? So across these 3 studies, we found that the role model that's most effective for black women was really tied to their levels of stigma consciousness. Okay? So first, in our first study looking at our sample of college students, we found that whether that role model was effective really was tied to those levels of stigma consciousness. So for black women who were high in stigma consciousness, the role model needed to be someone who shared the same gender and race. Okay? But for black women who were low in stigma consciousness, having a role model that shared that gender identity seemed to be effective enough. Okay? Then in our 2 intervention studies, we found specifically that for black women who are low in stigma consciousness, one good intervention is having a role model who comes across as an ally. Okay, so she describes herself in a way that kind of makes her seem like she's an ally for black women. Okay? And then in our 3rd study, we found that for black women who have high levels of stigma consciousness, they're going to benefit the most when they're exposed to a white woman role model who has been labeled an ally by a fellow in-group member. Okay? So what's next for this research? Okay? So we have these 2 intervention studies that kind of have given us confidence that we have an effective intervention for black women. So as Buffy mentioned, my collaborator and I received a couple of external grants. So we'll actually be filming a video this summer where we include these particular interventions. So specifically, we will have some white female role models who come across as allies, and then we'll also have a white female role model who is endorsed as an ally explicitly by a black female. Okay? So we'll have this video that kind of contains both interventions in order to see if this then alleviates social identity threat concerns. And we plan on testing it amongst a couple of different populations. And so this work is looking at the impact in STEM. And so we plan to examine this amongst black female STEM majors. But we also want to just look at this video in the context of people who just happen to have underrepresented identities. So we're also working with a group in Indianapolis to examine the impact of this video amongst Latina high school students. Okay? So some future research directions. So what else do I have planned? Okay. So one thing that is definitely missing from this research is, can you use these strategies to make a white male an effective role model? Okay. So I'm actually running a study, I guess, over spring break. So I have some students who are working on this study this semester, where we'll be looking to see if you can use these strategies to make a white male an effective role model for white women, okay? And after we've ran that study, the next step is then to see if we can make that white male an effective role model for women of color, okay? So using the strategies we've used, endorsement, framing them as an ally to see if they can come across as someone who will bolster belonging, okay? So another project I'm working on is one that I'm really excited about, and it's using what are called ambient identity safe cues. Okay? So ambient identity safe cues are referring to different features that you have in the environment that kind of signal that that person values your particular group. Okay? So Elon has a lot of ambient identity safe cues. So if you've ever worn like a belong button with the rainbow in the background, or if you have like a safe zone sticker in your office window, that is an example of an ambient identity safe cue. Okay? So I'm really interested in ambient identity safe cues for two reasons. Okay? The first is just that we tend to adopt these cues and we say, well, yeah, this should totally signal that I'm an ally, but we don't necessarily have the empirical research that suggests that they're doing what they're supposed to do, right? So one reason why I'm interested in these is because we want to make sure that the cues are being received, and I'm also interested in how people of different identities receive them, okay? So for instance, if you have a safe zone sticker in your office, what does a woman of color have to say about that particular cue? Does it signal that you value her identity? Do they kind of transfer to other identities, or is it specific to the identity it's advertising, okay? Another reason why I'm interested in ambient identity safe cues is really just a practical one, okay? So the reality is you might be an ally and you might have someone that will totally vouch for you and say, yeah, they're a great ally. But if that person never approaches you to figure it out, well, then you're not going to be able to mentor that person and give them the services they need. But if you have something that you can embed in the environment, perhaps that then will make the person more likely to approach you, okay? So imagine if you are a student of color and you're trying to figure out who you want to do research with in your department, and you look on their department webpage and they have a picture of a student that they mentored in the past, and you recognize that it's someone who's part of an underrepresented group, okay? Or maybe they have a picture of them sitting in their office and you notice that they've recently read the book Hidden Figures, or maybe they list it as their favorite book. Or my favorite identity safe cue, I have a picture here, is Beyonce. Okay? So imagine if you walk into someone's office and you see a picture like this up on a bulletin board, okay? Or just Rosie the Riveter herself. What does that then signal, okay? And so what we're doing right now is we have amassed a whole bunch of different cues that we believe can be identity safe cues, including ones here that we use at Elon, and we're testing them amongst the different populations. So women, we have some STEM majors and then also some black women from a few different institutions to see, do they really convey allyship? So that's step one. Then the next thing that we plan to do is to take the cues that do signal allyship and embed them in mock faculty web pages and see how students respond to them, okay? And so that's kind of what the next steps are for this research, okay? So I kind of already alluded to a little bit in what ways this research applies to Elon, but I just wanted to talk a little bit more about that before I wrap up today. So one message that I hope you all got from this talk is that it's really critical to explicitly signal allyship, okay? But also that it can be relatively easy to do, okay? And so making sure that you have these kind of cues in the environment around you is a good way to try to signal allyship. Okay. So I have this picture here because this picture is outside my office. Okay. So in the little window, I have this picture, and then at the bottom, I typed Beyonce is also welcome because why not, right? But this is a very explicit way of indicating that you value all identities. Okay. And so embedding these features in our office, having them on our websites, and just trying to be more strategic and thinking about ways that we can incorporate identity safe cues in the environment around us is one way to try to signal allyship. Okay. And so maybe on your faculty department webpage you have a spotlight on diversity tab where you feature students who are involved in undergraduate research that come from various backgrounds. Or maybe you highlight the work that relates to diversity that's being done in your department. Okay? And so thinking about the type of advertising you endorse, the types of information that you provide to communicate these identity safe cues. Okay? Now, while I'm all for incorporating identity safe cues, please keep in mind that it doesn't take the place of then being that ally and then being that role model and being that mentor, okay? So I think that these cues will increase the likelihood that individuals who are part of these groups who will approach you, but once they do, it's obviously up to you to try to make sure you communicate that you are someone who's there to help them succeed here at Elon and in other environments, okay? So I want to thank you all again for allowing me an opportunity to talk and ramble and talk about my research. I also, of course, have to thank my awesome, amazing, wonderful collaborators, Eva and Ezgi, as well as our funders for supporting this work, and then also Elon and IUPUI as well, because they've also been a big part of getting this work done. Okay? So thanks again.